started. I will just give a very quick introduction about what the Pak-CRN is. So my name is Connor Lindenberg. I think everyone can see my screen, or I hope so. If not, just raise a hand. But yeah, thank you for joining this morning, or I guess this afternoon. My name is Connor Lindenberg. I'm based in Bonn, Germany with the UNU EHS. And this Pak-CRN initiative is the capacity building component of our project in Pakistan. So improving climate governance in Pakistan. And we have been hosting a series of webinars for the past roughly 10 months or so. And so this is the 7th in the series. And yeah, we're very excited to have everybody join. And very excited to have Jakob be able to host this webinar. So this one seemed to be quite popular, and yeah, excited to see what he has to say. But I'll give you a really quick overview of what this Pak-CRN is and what the capacity building component of the project is that I am hosting here now. So yeah, Pak-CRN. So we have a series of objectives, mostly focusing on facilitating connections between various practitioners in Pakistan. And through that, yeah, knowledge sharing, innovation, and highlighting progress in climate resilience in Pakistan. So we very, very much hope that people will be attending future webinars. And if they want to get more involved, we have a LinkedIn network that I think a good amount of you have probably come across in online. But if not, I'll share the link here afterwards. And yeah, we would welcome you to join or just peruse what we have available online. So there's a series of webinars, like I said earlier, that we've hosted already. It's all available for you to join or to watch again. They're hosted on YouTube, and you can also download them and watch in your free time if you can't do it online. So all the materials are available, and yeah, that's something that we would continue doing in the future. So if you're not able to join right then and there at the moment, you can always join or watch later on. So that's something that we've made available. We also try to facilitate networking and collaboration between the members. Knowledge sharing, like I said, so that's something that we really focus on, having all the materials, having all this stuff available online for anybody to access. You don't have to be part of the network. You don't have to join anything if you don't want to, but this is still available for anyone that might be interested. And then, yeah, professional development. So this is one aspect of that. We also share a lot of opportunities for trainings. I think we shared one earlier last month. So this is opportunities that are available to anybody that want to potentially sign up. Yeah, and we've had a few opportunities to do that. So can continue on. Yeah, so maybe just a quick overview. Webinar series, what you are a part of now. We share a quarterly newsletter that's oftentimes updating on the different training offerings that we have. And then the LinkedIn page is really kind of the catch-all. So everything that we are doing, everything that is offered, you will be able to find on the LinkedIn page, including access to like the newsletter, webinar series, everything. So that is kind of a good place to, if there's anything happening, the LinkedIn page is where you will be able to find it. So. And I think that's everything from my end. Just, yeah, a really quick overview of what we're doing, and just wanted to say thanks everybody for joining, and I can hand over the reins to Dr. Jakob Steiner, and he can share with you what he is going to be presenting today.
Sorry, I had to find my mic. I finally found it. You can hear me, Connor, right? And you can see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks so much to you for the invitation, and thanks to all of you for joining today. My name is Jakob Steiner. I'm a postdoc at the University of Graz in Austria at the moment, but currently I'm sitting a few doors down from where Connor is sitting in at United Nations University in a group called GLOMOS. So we are specifically looking at risks in mountain regions. And I'm also a fellow at the Asian Mountain Academic Alliance. That's a network of universities from Afghanistan all the way. Well, it's growing at the moment further in the HKH region. And it's from Afghanistan all the way to Bhutan and Myanmar it used to be, and it's going further now. It's really trying to bring together universities from the region to collaborate on research, but also on finding funding and develop work together. When Connor asked me to speak here, we ping-ponged a bit what would be possible for me to talk about. I have many years of experience in working in Pakistan, but specifically in mountains. So this was pretty clear that I would be talking about that aspect. And what I want to do today, I'm not going to present a certain research project or a specific model, but I want to look at climate vulnerability and resilience in mountain contexts in Pakistan in general, trying to focus on some aspects that go across institutional levels and across topics as well. And I'm going to use, of course, the experience that I have from my research work and working with government stakeholders and non-government stakeholders in the region as well, to try to argue a bit where I think there is probably a lot more. So, we have the resilience is already in the name of the network. There is probably a lot more resilience than some stakeholders, especially outside of the region, realize at different levels. To some of you, this may also be pretty clear already. It depends a bit where you're coming from, right? But I think there are still missed opportunities at times that we as scientists, in my case, but also as stakeholders working in government, can still improve a lot more to actually increase resilience of mountain communities with respect, especially to climate change. So very briefly, first and the picture that I chose here, it's for those of you who have been to, so that's in Ganche, in Baltistan, and I like the photo because it includes a couple of the aspects that I think go into this vulnerability and resilience, right? You have the highways that is from Ganche, from the town, it's transporting material and people to one of the outlying villages, and it's transporting material that I think is visualizing the challenges that we're faced with. It's transporting gabions, and gabions that's where I probably should also say where I'm coming from. I'm a hydrologist, so I'm a natural scientist looking at water resources specifically and the associated risks to water resources, right? So this is also, you'll see this during the presentation. I'm going to look at it from this way. And during my studies and my research work, I've worked a lot with gabions. So these metal pieces that you see on the top of the highways here, these are used as flood protection, right? And they are needed more and more in the region to actually to protect infrastructure, to protect communities from mass flow events. But at the same time, the highways is also transporting a fridge, which is, for those of Ganche is weirdly enough not connected to the national grid of electricity, right? So they have a lot of hydropower, small scale hydropower. There is electricity, but it's very, very vulnerable to shocks, especially climatic shocks. And of course, electricity supply, which you would think you would need for a fridge, is increasing in far-flung villages as well. And also the need for it is probably increasing because it's getting hotter. We're going to look at those at the plots as well. But the fact that someone is able to afford a fridge and is willing to transport that all the way into a place that's actually pretty hard to reach still with the highest shows you in a way the resilience that is there with people to try to work around the challenges that they have. And I'm going to use a couple of such pictures throughout. I'm not just going to show you science results either, to try to visualize the challenges that we face with. So just a bit further, why is it me talking about this? Obviously, I'm not from the region. I'm not from Pakistan. I'm originally from Austria. But I've been working in Asia broadly since 2006, so since the earthquake just after the earthquake in Kashmir. I was based in Pakistan for many years, mainly in Lahore, sometime in Bakh in Azad Kashmir, and the last years in Islamabad. But I've also been based in Nepal. I've also worked on projects in China, in Western China, and Central Asia. Between 2020 and 2022, I was the group lead for the cryosphere at ICIMOD. ICIMOD is an international, intergovernmental, center for integrated. I have to change my. Technology. I think I put my AirPods. I'm very new to AirPods, so I put them in the wrong way. I'm very old school. Normally, I still have the big ones, and since now I cycle to work, I use AirPods. I think it should be better now. So I was the group lead in the cryosphere at ICIMOD. That is also Pakistan is part of that organization on mountain development, and I was focusing specifically on field work and working with stakeholders on the cryosphere. Within that, or connected to that and spinning out from it, I'm still involved in AMA. This is what I mentioned before. It used to be called HUC before, Himalayan University Consortium, and I'm a working group lead there, especially on high mountain data, or as one of my colleagues who is also involved there, I think he was even in the webinar recently, said, can you please remove the high from that high mountain data, because we really should be talking about all mountains, not just about the high mountains. And he's absolutely right. I actually should get rid of this high part of it. And I'll get back to this on a map on Pakistan's mountain just afterwards as well. But in this working group, we're really looking into the challenges of data, open data, fair data use, and data between different stakeholders as well. I lead a small project on risk data in the region, where we also run regional statistics on hazards and risks in the region, and where we provide rapid assessments. And I'll mention this briefly in the presentation as well. And I think relevant here as well, I also co-chair the working group at GPEX, which is part of the World Climate Research Program on, so that's the precipitation experiment, where we specifically in future, in the next decade, look at high intensity precipitation, and I co-lead the working group on capacity building. So we really want to work further on how to better prepare institutions as well to be ready for, changing precipitation patterns, especially in the high intensity side. I also do other work in Greenland, in the Arctic, but that's not so relevant here in this presentation, I think. So when I talk about resilience today, I won't be able to cover every aspect of it. Resilience is a huge topic. Resilience in mountains is a huge topic. This is just one presentation, right? But I want to emphasize that I think it's important to understand that resilience can happen at many different levels. Right? And these are the levels that I want to at least make you aware of with respect to mountain regions. There is the global and regional level, right? There are, and I'll mention this in a second, which communities. There are communities on the global level talking about risks in mountain regions. There is the federal national level. So in case of Pakistan would be Islamabad and ministries and departments sitting there making decisions for the whole country. Certain power and certain authority lies only at that level, right? There is the provincial, regional level, right? That I think when it comes to implementation becomes more important, but when it comes to resources, it's a bit different. And then finally, there's of course the local level. So the people who are actually sitting at the receiving end of risks, but also at the who know what resilience against something or towards something actually is. And resilience at all these levels, there can be resilience at all these levels, right? But I think it's important when we talk about resilience, we also know which level we are talking about. It can be resilience of myself as a person against heat waves, but it can also be the resilience of the, of a national government against the floods that are coming repeatedly. Also could be the resilience of global funders to understand what we actually have to focus on in the future to be prepared for what is coming next. Now, I'm not going to talk about the global and regional level so much because we want to focus on Pakistan here. But just for you, and if you're not aware of those networks, there are a couple of global networks that are specifically focusing on mountains. And I think in them, Pakistan is represented, yes, but they're always interested to hear more from the regions, right? So if you're interested, do Google those initiatives. There is Adaptation at Altitude, which sits with UNEP. It's a network of different stakeholders. There's the Mountain Research Initiative. As the name suggests, it's really trying to foster research in mountain regions. And there is a smaller, this GLOMOS that is co-hosted by EURAC in Bozen in Italy and the UNU here in Bonn, which is looking at global risks under this mountain safeguard research. It's a relatively small group. There are other regional initiatives as well, many for different mountain regions. I mentioned ICIMOD, there is Condesan in South America, there is something in the Caucasus. But there are these networks, and in these networks we engage to try to exchange across countries. and they are as open as can be, if they really do need expertise from these regions. So whoever, if you're curious, do check them out. The four pillars that I want to look at, or actually three of those I want to focus at for resilience, that cross-cut across all those four levels is knowledge on resilience, right? And the triangles I put here is a bit, where I think where we do have more knowledge. For example, I think most of the knowledge on resilience actually lies with the people who have to deal with it every day, right? And it decreases the further away you go from mountains, which can be problematic because then if you look on the other side, right, what I put here, financial resources are often very much around the global initiatives and they decrease the further you go down to people. So I want to talk about knowledge in the very beginning. I then want to talk about capacities. And here the triangle is a bit more confusing. There is one, I think, which is important to emphasize, that capacities are actually pretty strong on the levels in between the gray area of policy that is not so visible to the globe, right? To the global initiatives. So this is not not the minister of a certain ministry speaking, but it may be the technical staff sitting in the different departments, also across provincial capitals. I think in Pakistan and in other mountain regions, this is often stronger than people realize. It's not always well coordinated or well communicated what happens. But of course, there's a different way of seeing capacities and resilience as well, where I think most of the capacity is actually with the people on the ground because that goes parallel to knowledge. I want to talk about that a bit. And the third pillar I want to talk about is data. And here, different ways of knowing also have different ways of data. Of course, we have global data. There's quite a lot. It's easy to generate nowadays, and it will become increasingly easy. There is a lot of data on the ground because, again, people have the knowledge. But then in the middle, where decisions are taken, it becomes a bit fuzzy. And I will use a couple of examples on mountains in Pakistan why this is the case. And then finally, on resources, we often have an imbalance, right? So there are different, so it's not just financial resources, may also be technical resources of knowing how to cope with resilience or with adverse effects. Those resources, I think, are unequally distributed as well. They sit a lot with local populations. And again, then we have, models and frameworks developed at the global and regional level, but it doesn't trickle up or down so well to then the federal level or the regional level where decisions on the policy side are actually taken for different reasons. And if you just look at financial resources, then the triangle is really upside down, right? Because I received another message, a WhatsApp message just a few minutes ago from a colleague for a new glove project in another country, not in Pakistan, that gets thousands and thousands of US dollars from the top down. And we are already worried that, how much of that will actually end up at where it matters most. Often that trickle down doesn't work so well. I'm not going to talk about in resources so much because that's, it's not also, I'm not at a bank. I'm not the one dispersing resources. I think it's just important to keep that in mind for resilience, of course. Now, the thematic cross sections that I will touch on simply because that's where I'm coming from is water as a resource and as a hazard because I'm a hydrologist by training. I'm going to use glacial lake outburst floods as a vehicle to communicate, not to say that they're the most important topic, not at all. I would actually argue to be careful with the topic as well. But it's a very useful one because it's recognizable. It's very recognizable in Pakistan. It's been communicated in the region as well on all those levels, right? In the global media, but also on local level on social media. And then finally, I want to mention a little bit something that we are very interested in and that is linked to those hazards, of course, and that's where risk becomes interesting is mountain infrastructure at different levels. Again, for those of you who have, who know Gilgit-Baltistan well, they can perhaps recognize some of these locations here that have been, the pictures. If I haven't put a source, they're generally taken by media in my fieldwork. Now, the question is, of course, resilience to what, right? And there are a couple of levels. One is, of course, climate change. Now, if you are interested why climate change to us is so interesting in mountain regions, I'm going to do some self-advertisement here on a paper that we recently published where we really looked at elevation-dependent climate change in mountain regions across the globe and the general knowledge we have, and where we synthesized all this into a review paper where we updated kind of the state of the knowledge, how climate change is happening largely more rapidly at elevation than elsewhere. Unfortunately, this is behind a paywall, and if you cannot access it for some reason, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to send you the PDF. This really just gives you an overview of what the global community is also looking at, not just in Pakistan, right? But the plot that I give here and all the data plots that I will show during the presentation, just to make you aware, none of this is secret data, right? I will show some figures from publications, and I put the source then. Those may not be accessible to everyone, those data, but the data that I show here without the citation, which means it's the plots I produced, this is data that is accessible to all of you, and actually pretty easily. So just to also make people aware, for those of you who are not familiar with data crunching anyway, a lot of the data to show where we are at is at our fingertips. And this is just for the Hunza region. These are monthly, so on the top plot, what you see are monthly temperature values starting in the 1940s, going all the way to 2024 in this case. I did this for a specific study that we're doing in Hunza. And I think it's just there to visualize that, what some of us have been feeling when you are, in this case, in Hunza, right? That in August, and I took here out the mean values just for August, we had seen, so between the 1950s to the 2010s, there was an increase of half a degree per decade in temperature in summer months in the region, right? And half a degree per decade is really, really a lot. That's a steep rise. But it's not only happening in August, it's also happening in winter at a slower pace. But in winter, it's also problematic. It's still in the freezing area in many locations in Hunza because it's below zero. But that's problematic for snowpack, right? At the same time, what is happening? Rainfall is the second plot. So rainfall values, the extreme values, are increasing, right? This is getting a bit more wonky. The trend is less clear. You also have to be careful with this data. This is not bias corrected to any station data. This is, ERA 5. We call this reanalysis data. But very roughly from this, we already see we have more extreme events. And at the same time, the last plot at the bottom is you see snowfall is decreasing. So what is basically happening is the same amount of water is still there, right? We don't lose water. We never lose water. The same amount of water will always be on our planet. It's just somewhere else where it used to be before. And in this case, it's moving from from snowfall to rainfall, which can be problematic for a couple of reasons. So this, if you ask people in the region, of course, they will be aware of those changes, right? They will communicate it in different ways. But I'm not showing those responses here, but we had questionnaires in Shishkat, for example, which is on the north part of Atabat Lake, where people were asked about changes, and they mainly talked about snow. They did not talk so much about the debris flow, which is really, really problematic for Shishkat, for those of you who know the village, right? The biggest concern for them was snow, because this changes for everyone. It changes all the time. The debris flow, yes, is problematic, but this is, you learn to live with it. The change of snow is really hard to adapt to, and we don't know where it's going. This is a visualization of the temperatures, just to show you how stark this was the last couple of years. Just temperature in 2025 in the months of June, July, August. And I was interested, I made this plot because we realized already that last summer was especially bad when it came to glacial lake outburst floods and debris flows. So I'm the last one who is going to say, glacial lake outburst floods are we should be scared of them all the time. I'll get to this afterwards. But last summer was really bad across the region. And those events that I show here are in different countries, right? All these dots are different mass flow events. People have also died. And the question is a bit why last year? And the map that you see is the temperature in June, July 2025 compared to the decade before in these months. And you can see that in Pakistan, in the northern part, so this is around Giza. So those two globes happen in Giza, is more than 4 degrees above the average from the previous decade. And the previous decade was already too warm, right? So this is not compared to the beginning of last century. This is compared to 2015 to 2024. So last summer and the summer before already was extremely warm at elevation. And that is problematic for a couple of reasons. But I think to some degree, it also explains why we saw more of these flood events, right? But climate change is important. But it's not just climate change. There are other changes as well happening. So we shouldn't make a ranking and say, this is the most important, because then we start to forget about the others. Socioeconomic change is another one. And there are many different aspects to it. I cannot go into all of those. But I try to choose a plot here that is very, is visually appealing. And these are the tourism numbers just for Hunza. between 2007 and 2017 from a book that I don't have in digital format. That's why it's taken in a bit of a wonky, taken by my smartphone. But if you're interested, have a look. It's very expensive, but it's a very, very good book called Hunza Matters by Professor Kreutzmann, who probably some of you have heard about. He's in Germany as well. But I also like the book. There's a lot of text in it and many stories, but it also has very good data graphs. And these are the tourist numbers for Hunza. And I think an interesting aspect here is if you look at 2007, so the red bars that you see, monthly numbers, are the foreign tourists, right? Non-Pakistani tourists, that who in 2007 were still nearly half of the total tourist number. Those actually decreased in absolute numbers towards 2017, but the absolute number of tourism still increased, right? So now if you have the international narrative that you have is, okay, Pakistan is becoming less safe, less tourists are going, but the development is the opposite. Now, again, to many of you, this is known already, but I think to international donors, you have to explain this, that just because the foreigners have not come anymore doesn't mean actually the opposite has happened. It has exploded in terms of numbers, right? And this is, of course, because socioeconomic change in the country as well. More and more people are able to afford to go on summer holidays, and they're willing, and for different reasons, to go to the mountains. Again, there climate change may play a role because it becomes so hot in Lahore that it's more comfortable to sit in Gojal for your summer holidays. But there are also other reasons, of course. And migration is another topic that this is just one figure that I think is very specific to Gojal from a paper that's now many years old already. But it shows you the destinations of different people from Gojal across the last couple of decades, where they went as well and how this has changed, right? Largely here, so the top plot is male household members, and the first, so each bar is here, is one person in Gojal. Starting from people that are now quite old already, and to the younger generations, and you can see that all of those have moved to different places within Pakistan, within Gilgit-Baltistan, but also abroad. And where they go has, of course, changed. But migration has always been the case with male members of the community. It has changed rapidly with female members of the community, right? Before, female members were migrating within Gojal, largely also because of marriage, but they have also started to migrate a lot elsewhere. And migration is very, very important for exposure, but it's also very important for where knowledge travels, right? People keep knowledge and they take it to Karachi. It may be useful to Karachi, but if it's not in Gojal anymore, how does it still travel from Karachi to Gojal? Maybe new knowledge is being gathered in Karachi that's useful for Gojal or for Gilgit-Baltistan, but then the communication is also different than when people were living still in that place. So socioeconomic change has a big impact on resilience as well. And there are examples where this can be positive and where it can be, so where migration can be positive and where it can be negative, right? Sometimes knowledge is lost because people leave. Sometimes knowledge is gained because people come back with knowledge that wasn't available to local villages. And then there is finally geopolitical change, which I'm really not going to talk about in this talk here, but is of course important to keep in mind that we are not in a vacuum here, right? So we have to also consider geopolitical change. So I'm going to, so already now half an hour into, the framing of everything. And like I said, I'm not going to talk about all those 4 pillars, but I want to talk first about the knowledge aspect here, which I'm going to use an anecdote here from, talking to 2 people. This is in Skardu. So you have a blacksmith, and in the background who is running his machine with the bicycle wheel to form tools. And in the foreground, his colleague who is helping him. And I was talking to the guy on the left, actually. And this is a picture where you could try to tell stories of archaic knowledge and, if you want to put it in negative terms, being backward in terms of technology. But actually, when you know what these guys talk about, you know that there is a lot of, knowledge rooted in the actual changes now and very global knowledge. So the guy on the left was telling me how he has been in summers being porting for international teams to K2. So he's helping on climbers to international climbers from all over the world to go to K2. And he has been observing climate change from Skardu all the way to Baltoro Glacier and to K2, and how this has changed with resources on snow and everything. And so he works in a traditional enterprise that preserves a lot of the knowledge from decades and centuries ago, but that doesn't mean that he's not rooted in the 2023 in this case very much in a global system. That if you actually turn around from this picture, I took another one which was from a Pak-CRN, which to those of you who are not from Pakistan is basically Foodora or Food Panda system of the gig economy in Pakistan, which goes all the way to very small towns now already, right? Which is a very modern, modern in the sense of new advent to the global. Yeah, it's a global gig economy. There is a pizzeria on the other side of the street of this blacksmith, right? So these. And there is a Best West, not Best Western, the Western Union that you can send money around the globe as well. But that knowledge is, it's rooted in locality, but it doesn't mean that it's stuck in time somewhere. It's very much up to date, and they're very much aware, of course, of the current climate change challenges as well. To visualize this a bit, so these are examples from Chitral, but this also happens elsewhere in northern Pakistan. Now let me quickly play the video. This is for those of you who are not. I'm going to mute the. No, you don't hear anyway. It's not so important what is being said in the background, but basically this is harvesting of avalanche snow in Chitral, right? And this is a very old tradition that is being done because there is a need for cooling. There is a need for basically an old way of a fridge in the region. These blocks of ice, this compacted snow, which then is basically ice already, is being sold in the local market for cooling purposes, whether that is food or to put in your sherbet, doesn't matter so much. It is a business that includes many different stakeholders, but it's a business that also means that people know about the hazards. They know where avalanches are coming down. They know when it's safe to do this. They know when it's not safe. And there is a very complex, which we are trying to document at the moment, a very complex business setup with insurance even involved, because it's a very volatile commodity, right? Snow can melt. So if you cannot sell it, what to do? So this is a very interesting business that has not been invented 2 years ago, not 10 years ago. It's been there always. And it's a natural way of resilience to the challenges that you have. Now, this is done differently on the other side of Shandur in Gilgit-Baltistan. There we have what got very popularized also in global media, glacier grafting, which has much more than a spiritual component as well, right? Where glacier of male and female provenance is being combined and is being transported to higher locations in community exercises. Now, similar idea, you use that ice that you collect for as a resource in future, and it's like a bank account. You put this ice in a place where it's safe for the future. So you think ahead, you invest in your resilience. Here, I think what is very important as well, and this has actually, by glaciologists from the global north, this has been criticized because it's, they were saying, there is no female glacier, there's no male glacier. This is honky, this is complete hullabaloo, which I think is quite problematic because it does not understand that, whether you believe, it doesn't matter whether you believe that there is a female or a male glacier. That's not the point here. The point is that there is a community-based exercise that has value to local people. And, frankly, we in the global north have many spiritual beliefs in setups that have no grounding in science, in conventional science. But that community exercise builds resilience because it builds community interaction, and it builds an understanding of, for example, how ice works, right? It makes you understand what is permafrost, for example, because this only works with permafrost. It doesn't work everywhere in Pakistan. You cannot scale it up to any place. You need certain conditions as well. So you need people who understand those conditions, which means it increases knowledge as well. And this is also done now, for example, combining more conventional methods with capturing avalanches, right? So these are nets that are built in Shigar to capture snow from avalanches, and they are compacted so much that you can then in spring get this compacted, the melting water from this compacted snow to actually irrigate very dry lands in Baltistan, because Baltistan, even though it has the Indus, is actually quite dry. Now, specifically on glacial lake outburst floods, I've mentioned this before, just briefly, that I'll use this as an example, and I'll use it also for local knowledge. Glacial lake outburst floods is a very simple idea. It's a lake that is attached to a glacier, and that breaks, and because of that creates a flood. Now, this happens all over the world. It has happened for centuries. It's not coming because of climate change. It was always there. Now, to give you an example here, this is a GLOF that has, and we often say GLOF, which is the abbreviation to glacial lake outburst floods. This is an event that has happened in Kumrat in 2024, and it visualizes very nicely what basically happens. You have on the left, in August 2024, you have an upper lake, which is this one here, which is disconnected from a lower lake by a glacier. There's a glacier in between, so a big dam of ice, right? And a few days later, on the 5th of September, this lake has decreased in size. Previously, it was 2 kilometers square, then it was 1 kilometer square. So obviously what has happened, it has drained under the glacier into the lower lake. And then because it has drained into the lower lake, that lower lake, the dam of that lower lake, which is a dam of rock, basically, it failed and it created a huge flood. You can also see this from the colors of the lake, right? Before, the top lake had a milky color, which is typical for glacial lakes. The lower one was more green. It had other sources as well. After the flood, it was all milky because the bigger upper lake was contributing all this meltwater to the lower one. Now, this is a snapshot from the rapid response reports that we do with different stakeholders, and we then also try to translate it into local language. We do this very, very rapidly to make it accessible to stakeholders, right? It's really just to get an idea of what has been happening and making sense of it. Now, we can do this now with remote sensing, but actually there was local knowledge on these because those have always been around, these hazards. There has been local knowledge on those all the time. One example is what is called locally as Puberanch. It's a system of fires, and here you see the map that you see on the top, so bottom right. All those single fire systems, symbols that you see is basically what you then see on the left picture. There is a pyre of wood, and there is a person associated to that pyre who is responsible for that pile of wood to light it in case of danger, right? So this would be very close. That would be one very close to the lake, for example. If the lake changes, so if it grows rapidly or if it does something that's a bit scary and you anticipate that it's going to breach soon, the fire is lit. The next guy downstream in the valley, sitting at the next fire, sees the upstream fire, lights his or her fire. Then again, the next person sees that fire. And this way, you have a transmission of information all the way then to eventually the telephone system where you can disseminate it further. This is a system that existed long before ESCOM and long before Telenor and SOM reached the area, right? So only now it has stopped to work in the way it used to because knowledge has disappeared to some degree, but also because we were suggesting that technology can actually take its place. Now, the problem with technology is it's only as smart as its user. Now, I don't know how long that is still true with ChatGPT and Claude. This is getting a bit more scary, but when you don't know how to treat an early warning system technologically, then you have a problem, right? And this happened in many cases also in Pakistan. This is in Sherkila and Khizer, where there used to be an early warning system. It was installed, but the solar panel had been stolen, so the system didn't work. So anyway, 8 people died in a flood. And this becomes problematic when you start to trust the technology, but the technology does not work. And then you think you have increased your resilience, but actually you haven't, and then you're caught on the wrong foot. And a very famous example, I think all over Pakistan, because it was popularized with social media, is the Raushan event in Khizer last summer, which again, I'm going to show you a video for those of you who haven't seen this already. This was a huge GLOF event that resulted in a big debris flow that displaced 300 people approximately. Luckily, nobody died. But in this case, there was no technology in place even. It was not identified as one of the risky glacial lakes because the lake had only appeared a few months earlier. You see the satellite imagery before and after here. We were trying to track this afterwards as well. Now, luckily here, there was a sheep herder who was very high up. He saw that something was happening and he informed the downstream communities who then could be evacuated. I'm not sure what is left of that story. It was a social media viral story, right? Whether this sustainably turned into learning process, I cannot tell because I haven't been back to Khizer since then. But this it became quite heated, the debate in social media, because the people were saying, I mean, there is this local knowledge that is not valued as much as the technology, but that local knowledge actually saved us. And just to make a link here to more technology is, so we are working currently with that example actually on a tracking mechanisms where we can try to very quickly identify when these lakes appear and disappear automatically every week, right? So this is, if you quickly type, and you will be shared the slides as well, you can have a look at this GitHub account. It's in development still, but our idea here really is that we can actually trace this and operationalize it. And this doesn't need a sensor in the field. It's able to do it remote, which also means we can scale it on many different locations. This is just to say that, and this is not the only development. There are many different approaches trying to make early warning more efficient, but I think we can never do it just on a GitHub account. We still need to talk to the guy who actually knows, what the valley looks like, and that communication is challenging. So here, I'm going to close with that first part. What is still required really is working towards equitable frameworks and working with this local knowledge. We also should, when we define the multi-hazard risk frameworks or the risk frameworks in general, we should do this, with those experiencing the risk, and not by people who sit here only in Bonn and or in New York or in Paris, and develop it for people in Riese. And there is not that much exchange happening yet. There is the term CBFUs, community-based early warning systems, but that needs a lot more inclusion of the actual knowledge. Right now, that is still presented a lot in Geneva and the big panels, but the exchange on the local level doesn't work so well. And I think there needs to be a lot more documentation of existing knowledge that may disappear as well. And here I just give you, if you're interested in the languages from the region, from a podcast that unfortunately it seems to have died out, but the last episode that was broadcast last January was on Pakistan's mountain languages under threat, which I think was really, really interesting, to give you an idea. Now, I want to talk about capacities more on institutional level as well. This is going to be a shorter part before I then go on data, and I'm going to wrap up already. I give you here an example from another country, Nepal. So we are currently very interested in bridges in Nepal, and this is work we would like to scale to other countries, including Pakistan. We're interested in bridges because bridges are very important to connect people. So they're very important for resilience as well, right? But we need to know where they are and what quality they have. Now, in Nepal, these are the bridges currently available in this disaster portal of the Nepal government. So when I started to work on this last November, I thought, okay, this is what we have. There must be more. We have to start mapping those, right, with some methods. And until last week, I was trying to talk to different stakeholders in different departments, and I realized in different ministries and departments around the countries, there are a lot more bridges. And that's actually what the map looks like. But the national, federal level on the disaster portal doesn't know, because those are different data sets from, this ministry here, this stakeholder there. They don't talk to each other for different reasons. It hasn't been streamlined. So there is a lot of, and this was a lot of work by different smaller departments to pull that data together, right? But if it's not accessible then for the national scale risk assessment, for example, it's not that much use. So now we are able to work with a much greater data set already. We can improve that. Still needs to be improved, but it's already huge progress. And why am I saying this? We have the same challenges in Pakistan as well, right? Now here we first have to zoom out first. I was talking a lot about the high mountains, like I said before, but there are many mountains in Pakistan. And I think this is important for us to remember, right? All that is green on this map is what we define as mountains. So this is a large part of the country. More than 15% of Pakistan's population live in mountain regions. That's a lot. And there are many different, there's not just the Hindu Kush, Karakoram, Himalaya, which are globally the most recognizable names. There are many other mountain ranges, Suleiman, Kirtar, and I put here the big cities that, as having lived in Lahore and being, as Lahoris are thinking that Lahore is the center of the universe, I had to put it here as well. Lahore is pretty much far away from those mountains, but Islamabad and Karachi, two very big cities and important cities on the global stage, are very close to mountain regions. So I think that's important to not forget, right? We're not just talking about K2, glaciers, snow here. There are different mountain regions across the country. These are, many of you know here, I think it's mainly Pakistani colleagues in the call. I don't have to go so much in detail, but just to emphasize, there are many, many different stakeholders on the government level, the different levels of federal to regional government that have a stake in mountain risks. And there are some non-governmental organizations like Aga Khan, and then there are NGOs, of course. To me, unfortunately, still many of those are doing the same thing, right? For example, there is a lot going on GLOFs, all of them doing glacial lake outburst floods, but in parallel, there's a lot of redundancy. There is a lot like with the bridge example I gave you before, there is a big chance to actually try to band together and say, okay, maybe if you are already mapping all the lakes, we don't have to map all the lakes. If you are doing all this modeling, we don't have to do this, right? So, and this is not a Pakistan problem. This you have everywhere in policy as well, in governments. Right? But there is still a lot of potential to streamline and then to realize, and I'll get to this in the very end, that there are other problems as well. There is not just that one big famous hazard. There are other hazards too. And those we seem to forget about at times. And then there are the academic stakeholders. And I here just put a couple of important ones that are working in the mountain domains at the moment. They're across the whole country, right? And the streamlining between government stakeholders and academic stakeholders is not so smooth yet in the country. There is different ways of communicating, mistrust at times as well. I think there is a lot of improvement in terms of resilience building that can be had without having to look even outside of the country, working with the academic excellency that's already there. So this is basically what what I just said now. I think with the capacities that are in the country, there is still, we need better transparent mapping of the know-how that is there and the responsibilities as well for different hazards and risks, for example. It would be great, and some projects, especially with PMD, go in this direction of assessing the impact and reach of recommendations of government, right? How far in mountain regions do these informations actually travel, right? Does it stop at the Twitter account or the X account of a government department, or does it reach reach Husche when there is a warning about gloves, right? And I think this dialogue between, and this is what we do in this network of universities as well, the dialogue between the different stakeholders. And this is what I think Connor and his colleagues here are also trying to do very successfully. This dialogue actually helps a lot. It reduces redundancy, and because of that can also increase resilience. And then finally, and that again, also in that project, I think is important to invest in sustainable capacity building is relatively low key and is not that expensive, but it's possible. And then the last part in the very end of the presentation that I really want to give space to questions as well is I want to talk about the data that we have and that we don't have yet, perhaps, and how that is important. To us as scientists, it's important, but it's also important for science to policy. And resilience relies on data, right? We need to if we make decisions about adaptation, about resilience, we need to rely on data. This is not just data in GIS environments. It can be data that we collected without even writing anything down. Data can have many, many different forms. And I think it's very, very important to realize which data we actually need, right? I'm going to talk about the three aspects of that risk as well. There is data on hazards, and that's important to realize that these are often different data sets. We need all three, though. We need data on hazards, and we do have a lot of that. We need data on exposure. We have as well, but it's not as advanced, and we have very little data on vulnerabilities. And this is really where also there, again, in this forum here, I think that's why it's in the name, that is very crucial to further invest in, right? Now, glacial lake outburst floods are a great example. Just to give you a quick rundown, there are two main types of GLOFs, and that's important to understand, and the data as well. They're the ones from ice-dammed lakes, what I showed you before, if the dam is from ice. If the dam is from rocks, it's moraine-dammed lakes. And most of the GLOFs in Pakistan come from ice-dammed lakes, not from moraine-dammed lakes. And then there are two scarier newer types, both of which exist in Pakistan: supraglacial lakes, lakes on top of a glacier, and englacial lakes, lakes within a glacier, right? Much harder to detect because they are more ephemeral. We understand much more about the first two. And to give you the global view, so this is a global overview of ice-dammed lakes. Again, ice-dammed lakes are the predominant cause of GLOFs in Pakistan. Now, the summary that you see from this paper here is why, and it makes a lot of sense intuitively, right? Widespread deglaciation, so reduction of ice around the globe, projected for nearly all regions by the end of the 21st century, may bring most outburst activity to a halt. Research on glacial lake outburst floods of ice-dammed lakes suggests that those GLOFs are not going to increase. They're going to decrease. They're going to get less. And it makes sense because glaciers are receding so much, they cannot dam anything anymore. So this is important. It just doesn't make sense to say in Pakistan, it will get more. Some aspects if it will get less. We have to understand what is getting more and where it may appear in future where it hasn't happened before. Moraine dam lakes, these are the statistics for global numbers, that the graph that you see is at in here, are increasing. There is evidence for that. But so far, bluffs in Pakistan are not so much happening from this type, right? Now, this is a map that I made for a paper that is currently in review, just to give an overview. These are the different locations. Color in red is where bluffs have happened in the past in Pakistan. The numbers that are floated in media are often much larger, but this is because other hazard types are also called GLOFs, right? Even if they are not glacial lake outburst floods. So these are actually the numbers of glacial lake outburst floods per decade, right? In Pakistan, there is no clear trend of increase. It's variable, different years. There is observation bias because in the beginning of the 20th century, we were not so much able to record this well, but overall, not that many events compared to other countries, and also relatively few people have died compared to other hazards. A total of 11 people have died. This is still tragic, and I'm not saying that gloves are not important. They're also important for other issues. They destroy agricultural land, increase erosion, destroy infrastructure. But I'll show you in a second that we may forget about others because of this, right? I mentioned this already. Yes, last year was very bad. There will be really bad glove years in future as well. But we have to see it in context as well. We should not forget about risk. We're not talking about just gloves here. These are debris flows, right? Again, decadal numbers. Total fatalities in Pakistan, 120, a lot more. Now, people realize this, but if you look at the numbers of publications, sorry, I didn't put the map in here, but the numbers of gloves and publications is much, much higher than on the debris flows. If you look at avalanches, snow avalanches, this is a map of a paper that we recently published, remote sensing mapping in the whole region. Total fatalities just in Pakistan, and this is numbers that only started in the 1960s. 412 people, right, were killed in snow avalanches. And these are not skiers, these are not climbers on K2. These are people looking for their yaks, people looking for their agricultural produce somewhere, people traveling on roads. So in total numbers of fatalities, much bigger impact than glacial lake outburst floods. Hardly any research on that topic. So just to say, we collect these kind of data for the whole region to keep also track on what's actually happening to these two statistics, right? And that's important, I think. Now, some hazards that we seem to forget about. This is the available water in snow in the winter 2026 compared to the 30 years between 1990 and 2020, right? So this is just the gridded data average. It's really red, right, in northern Pakistan, which means that there was a lot less water, and this is just for December, January, February, so those winter months, a lot less water in winter last winter than in previous winters. Now, this is just 1 year, but this is 2025 winter against previous years. And then it's the time series starting in 2000 of snow water equivalent. This is the term we use, how much water there is in snow. It's decreasing. And what is it causing? That's what it's causing, right? We have severe water shortages. Skardu is the most famous example, but in many places in the region. We have droughts in places where, you have one of the biggest rivers in the world, and next to it you have a city that is facing droughts. It's a paradox in a way, but it's a real challenge. And we don't have actual numbers, how many people die because of this, but people are impacted by this. And you have repercussion effects, of course, because of it, that are causing issues, right? And people realize it. If you talk to stakeholders in Skardu, everybody, they know it. I'm not saying that, I invented this and only not at all. Many of you probably here know. But if you look at the coverage, it's much less. And because of that, and if you look up in the graph where I said, global and regional, if you look at the global and regional fora, it's hardly ever discussed compared to other hazards. And then we're forgetting exposure, right? And I think this, or we're not forgetting it, but it's not often looked at in more detail. There are global numbers on how many people are exposed to gloves, but they're useful, but on a local scale, they're not really accurate. For Gilgit-Baltistan, they just took the whole population of Gilgit-Baltistan and said they're exposed to gloves. Now, all of you who have been there know that there are many places in Gilgit-Baltistan who are so far away from any lake, they don't care, right? So again, it doesn't mean that gloves are not important, but we have to look at the data much more closely. And I think here we have a lot of potential from a remote scale, right? And I made these slides not for this presentation, of course. All of you know what Gilgit is, but I think this was made for an international audience in another presentation as well. I did not, not every slide that I made here, I just made for you today. I also reuse stuff. But I think Gilgit is very, very useful because people don't realize what urban space we have in mountains, right? And also what exposure because of it. How many people live at elevation also in these places? It's not just villages in Kachagar, no? It's like there is built up infrastructure. And we have data on this. This is the infrastructure data we have for Gilgit, right? Very easy to get. Every one of you can get this. This is not secret. This is previously the population data we had for Gilgit, which was pretty off until 2020, but it has improved a lot. So this is now the population data we have at global scale. We can have pretty good assessments on how many people. They're not perfect, not at all, but we can have pretty good assessments where people are. This is internet connectivity in 2019 in Gilgit. This is internet connectivity in 2024. This is data that I can get for every 3 months in the region. Really useful for us to understand where can we reach with early warning? Where can we reach with social media, right? And this data is, again, it's not, it's not owned by it's owned by someone, but it's been publicly available. We can use it to make risk assessments. And this is, I think there is a lot of potential to work with such kind of data. But of course, then I made 2 triangles, right? On the global scale, this is global data. Anyone can access. There is a lot of data. And then when you then talk to national stakeholders, ministries, often there is a bit of a focus on the data they themselves collect, which is fair enough. It's very valuable data. But then you're losing a bit the view of what else is there. And I think we're forgetting 2 things. Of course, weather stations, extremely important, that are being run by different government agencies in Pakistan, extremely invaluable. I mean, this is tremendous work and very important to keep investing in. But there is other data coming up now that can be paired with this. And then there is data, of course, with communities, right? Talking to the people who have been living with it. Sometimes data within Pakistan is only managed in Karachi or Islamabad by people who may not be the ones who actually know what those data mean. And also because they cannot, because they're so far away from it. So I think bringing in here the local knowledge and the local data in future is very, very important, right? And again, these are examples of, I talk to guys, this is between Skardu and Ganche, talking to the guys who make the irrigation channels and who told me about, drought. They told me about building infrastructure. They told me about financing of infrastructure, right? Because this is what these 3 guys, or that guy who is talking here, who was the head of the operation of building an irrigation channel here next to the road, trying to actually keep the trees growing next to the road so there wouldn't be so much sand transport on the road, so you can still drive between Skardu and Ganche. And they have a lot of knowledge and data that's there, but that also, should be integrated better. And this is in Shigar. When I was questioning a bit why we have these drought situations in Shigar and local communities, and this guy was telling me, look, I mean, the river is down here, my fields are up there. And there is no more snow melt coming. So what do? I need to have a pump in Shigar River to pump up the water, which previously was coming from the top. I didn't need any energy because it was flowing with gravity. Now I need to power it, and so I need money for this, which now it's pretty obvious, right? But I as an engineer needed this guy to explain it to me. And I think I'm coming to a close here. So we're now nearing the full hour. I think there is 1.5 hours for the presentation, right? So for those of you who are sticking around, there will be time for questions. I want to just also mention that we saw the tourism numbers at the very beginning, right? They're increasing, and this very high impact tourism brings problems for the region because the mountains are sensitive, and over tourism, we call it, can be problematic for ecosystems and people. One advantage it has, and then also again disadvantage, is there's more and more people report from these locations because everyone nowadays seems to be on their smartphone and social media. So every time something happens, someone is recording it, right? Now this has the advantage that we actually can get more data. In this case, this is again the case from Kumrat. There was the glove in 2024, which was not reported anywhere. And I only realized because I saw deposits in sediments further downstream going towards Swat. And I was curious, and I started to look upstream, and then I saw that the lake had breached, right? Because nobody was killed. There were no people in the valley, or very few people in the valley, actually. The impacts were not that big. People died, but because of the rains downstream. But then I Googled a little bit, and I immediately ended up in these, influencer type channels who, by chance, were in that valley just after the flood had happened, and were taking these impressive videos of sediment deposits that were crumbling, right? Which to us as geomorphologists is really interesting. So we can source those people who just take it for just, it's also for them, it's fine. This is their business. I think, being an influencer, that they collect this kind of information for their social media channels. For us, this can be useful for risk assessment. And it can also have the negative effect that problems are exaggerated, because influencers sometimes would say, oh, no, the mountain is exploding. I don't know. There is a big gulf happening. Well, actually, it's not a gulf. It's just another high level of the river, where all the locals would say, come on, this is happening every second day. Just because you arrived today from Lahore and you see it from the first time does not mean that this is the biggest problem we have, right? But social media is not very good in self-regulation. And this is also a problem that we have discussed this with ACCA previously, that they were concerned that because of this over virality of events, there was also fear created that was not appropriate. But I think we can at least think about what the potential and the pitfalls are as well, right? I'm going to jump over this, but this is ongoing work by a PhD student, also looking in exposure and vulnerabilities in communities. This kind of work is ongoing, right? Specifically talking to people on these hazards as well. But, and this is really where I'm at the end, it's really hard. So at the end of the data part, and like I said, I'm not going to talk about resources, because those are hard anyway, and much harder than is possible to talk about in an hour. It's really important for us, rather than to count more lakes and to count more landslides. That's also important, but others are doing already. We really have to think more on how do we disentangle the different impacts? What is climate change? What is socioeconomic change? And what is institutional change and institutional failure at times as well, right? And there are debates around this, but it's very, very hard to get a grip on that when we do risk modeling, for example, at a larger scale. And for example, where the data on economic impacts, it's really, really, really hard to get this, right? But it's very important for us to actually, and economic impacts at different levels, right? This can be national scale potato crop. This can also be local use of energy, whatever. These kind of data are there to some degree also in Pakistan, but they are much less consolidated than the physical science part of it. So I think there it would be really exciting also for anyone who is listening today to have more, and this is again going to, to this webinar, to have a debate across disciplines on how to bring the different forms of data together, to respectfully treat them as well. And to make sure that the relevant data sources are also represented in risk assessments. So here, I really think we also need to be forward-looking in data acquisition. We have to think what AI can do already, right? I'm not proposing that we should solve everything with AI, or what others can do better. But one problem that we see in Pakistan is that we have 10 different people mapping all the lakes, which is really, really hard work. But it's probably not very useful if we then have 10 data sets of lakes that all say something different, and they're even more confusing because everyone uses different methods, but we forget about all the other aspects, right? This is not to discourage if you already started to map lakes, that's fine. It's in general also important to understand gulfs, but we all seem to be gravitating to the same topics, also because as scientists, they give us more citations, they get more attention. That's a bit the issue as well, right? Also, thinking about data rescue, Pakistan has incredible time series on environmental data going back to 1947, but even further than this. It has longer time series on some environmental values than many other countries, regional and also globally. But a lot of that data is lost because it's not digitized as well. So, of course, we have to have more dialogue on data sharing and why that is useful, and also how to build trust that sharing data can be, does not have detrimental effects for those who created it or collected it. But yeah, I'm closing here, 5 minutes over what I wanted to do. Just to emphasize that, of course, resilience has many different forms. Also, in infrastructure, and I think this is, like I said already, we're currently working on bridges. I really like these images that you often have of the older ones and the newer ones. And if you're a structural engineer on bridges, you already know what the problem of the newer one may be when you have erosion and when you have floods, right? So there are issues with the new technology as well. So there is resilience in both those types, and there is of bridges, but there's also resilience in different types of governance and different types of institutions and different types of knowing risk. So I think it's important to acknowledge those and also to realize that those all exist in Pakistan, in mountain regions. That's all what I was talking about today. Thanks so much, Connor, for the invitation, and to all of you for sticking around. Yeah, I'm happy to take questions, of course, if there are any.
Yeah, thank you, Jakob. That was very informative and yeah, lots of information to process there. I shared in the chat a link to the survey as well as a link to our LinkedIn page if you want to join for future webinar offerings. Additionally, I will share here in a few minutes a download link to the webinar materials. It won't have the recording. That will take maybe an hour, 2 hours, but you can also find a recording of this webinar there as well in the very near future. But I know there was at least one question earlier. I would maybe, yeah, say as long as it's all right with Jakob, open the floor to any questions or comments. And yeah, we can take the next, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes to have a little Q&A discussion. But yeah, if everyone would take just a few minutes to fill out the survey, it's not for any grading or assessment purposes, but more so just so we can improve offerings in the future. So yeah, thank you. Did anyone have any questions? I don't remember who asked something earlier. I can't seem to find it, but yeah,
I can
I
also
would.
yeah.
Oh
So
yeah,
no,
go ahead.
yeah. Let's do
Mhm.
those first. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jakob and Connor. Sitting just a few floors down at 24th with you and ERR. And it has been a crazy weather outside from sunny to cloudy to rainy and then snowed. So, yeah, talking about climate and just I've had few thoughts of it. For example, I'm also from Pakistan and doing my master's here at UNU EHS, your risk program. So, I'm transitioning to my master thesis also. It was pretty insightful, to be honest. Like whenever we talk about uh, mm, early warning system, and right now 119 countries are reporting on multi-hazard early warning system in Pakistan, in the world, and Pakistan is including among those countries. So the question that comes that, for example, then how does the multi-hazard approach, like plays a role here? You showed us different academic papers that were like focusing on avalanche and then debris flow and then heat waves and so on and so forth. So the thing is that, for example, how would we, for like the same mountainous communities, they are uh, uh, they are exposed to heat waves in the month of, I believe, April, May, June, and then it leads to like shortage of water and drought per se, and then the same sort of situation is then turned into, like, when it's monsoon, it rains, and then it leads to and cascade into floods. So, like, the multi-hazard approach and the multi-hazard early warning system plays a significant role. And I would like to know your take on it. And at the same time, you mentioned about migration. So I was a bit I was, of course, we know that many people in Pakistan from mountainous communities do migrate from those communities towards the cities in order to, like, diversify their economy. But like there is another question: is the like the figures that you were sharing, was it only due to climate? Was it climate mobility, or does it include other socioeconomic aspects as well? Yeah, so these are like my first two initial thoughts, but I'm definitely going to have discussion with you, Jakob. Specifically, I'm going to do my research for my master's. It's focused on complex nature of risk, and I'm going to employ impact webs. So definitely looking forward to have a discussion with you very soon. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thanks for the question. Very important. Both of them very important. So the multi-hazard risk aspect. This is, I mean, as you probably know more than me, the terminology even has been popularized in the last couple of years more and more. Right now, every time we talk about the multi-hazard risk aspect of it, but if when we look at many of the projects being, and I'm involved in one of those big ADB funded ones in Nepal at the moment. It's really hard to get people still out of their single hazard approach, and then not even not going out into the risk domain, and there are these MHRAs, so the multi-hazard risk, or Fs, the multi-hazard risk assessment and frameworks. They are around. But often what they are just doing is, you take a map of all the hazard number one, and you take a map of hazard number two, and you take a map of hazard number three, and you put them on top of each other, and then you say, well, it's like it's an addition, which it never is, right? It's much more. There are feedback effects, and so we are, I think, as a global community dealing with this, we are still in the process of having too many meetings on going in circles at times as well, and trying to find the right approach. One problem that I think is, and this is I tried to mention in the presentation as well, is that not all stakeholders who really understand which hazards do we even want to focus on are involved, right? And this is often decided at the global level, but in anywhere in the world, but it's mountains specifically, variability between different valleys can also shift very quickly, right? You may have, and we see this with research projects where people in communities that are not connected to glaciers are asked how important glacier change is for them, but they're saying, I don't know, I don't care, because all our water is coming from snowmelt and not from glaciers. So then why should hazards from glaciers suddenly be a problem for me? There was never a glacier in my valley since since generations. So you also have to understand what the local specificities are and ask the people what their experiences are. And then we get to the modeling, which is also being done already. So we are trying to move away from doing hazard modeling just for debris flow, or just for floods, or just for heat waves, trying to put this together. But this is very, very challenging still. We have very little experience. We are doing it. It's work in progress, and it's a bit finicky, because even the models for hazards, the single hazards, are not great, right? And then if you start incomplete approaches for single hazards and putting those together into a multi-hazard approach, then things become very uncertain. So I think we are still in a process of really trying to figure out where we're going. On migration, it's a very crucial topic that warrants more than just me giving one answer, probably a separate webinar. But yes, so often actually the drivers are different than climate, right? This is not to say that climate doesn't play a role, but the story that climate is the one, actually the story that climate is driving people away, to migrate, to leave, is not even evidenced everywhere. The reasons for people to stay in very adverse conditions, to me living in Bonn, but if I grew up in Bonn, then probably everything in Pakistan is adverse, and I would say, well, I would have migrated long ago. But if you grew up in Pakistan, you say, well, this is where I grew up in, and this is where generations for thousands of years have lived in, so why the hell should I move from here? And the same you can do at a very local scale to a village in the last corner of Chapursan, where many people in Pakistan would say, my God, why don't you just move away? It's far too hard to live in Chapursan. And there are people who have the economic means to do so, and they're still not doing it because they are from there. And this is not a Pakistan problem. This is a global thing, right? You can have this in New York City, you have this in a village in Japan, doesn't matter. But we still have a very simplistic approach when it comes to climate scientists then talking to the migration specialists and basically saying, okay, we just assume that if things get bad, everyone leaves. This is not how things work. So when people migrate, often there are many other factors. Sometimes what we do see a little bit is that tipping points in climate and hazards have a kick, so they accelerate people to consider their choices, right? So we do have places, not just in Pakistan, but where people have lived with risks for generation, and then suddenly a threshold was reached where things became so bad that they decide, and they always were able to economically leave, right? They had opportunities, but at one point it was like, okay, this is doing it for me. I cannot deal with this anymore. But then it's also, again, it may not just be climate; it may also be being ignored by institutions or being frustrated with the help they get, and these kind of things that also play a role. So yes, climate can be a trigger, but it's rarely a linear one. It also can go that people can come back for reasons. I mean, you have, with heat waves increasing in lowlands and, it being relatively cooler in mountains, there are reasons for people who can afford it to say, okay, I actually want to move to the mountains. Perhaps not to Chapursan, but, perhaps to Natyangali, but that's also mountains. And so I think that migration doesn't go one way, it goes many different ways. So it's a very complex topic as well. But there is attention to that, but I think we have to be very careful not to become too simplistic. Yeah. Other
Oh, we lost you there for a second, Jakob.
sorry,
You might have.
I put myself on mute before I talk. That's not very smart. I just see that, I don't know if Akif Rahman, I just checked whether he's still here because he posted the question in the chat, but it seems that he has left already. So probably it's best if we go ahead with the questions from the people who've raised their hands. So that would be Neelam, I guess. So Nigar, sorry.
Hi. Good afternoon from Islamabad. This is Neelam. Thank you. It was interesting listening to the presentation given by Jacob, and I also am interested in working on the resilience concept of climate change. And I am basically from Hunza, from Shimshal. I have some of the lived experiences of what people are going through in those mountain regions, and currently working on one of the projects, climate adaptation programs in Pakistan, which is funded by UNDP, the GLOF 2 projects. And I can completely agree with you, Jacob, that the hazards that have been portrayed to the mountain communities is not what actually it is. Like GLOF is always being projected as the only risk that the mountain communities are facing. But once we currently, like last year, we were in during our field study, we talked to some of the women, and they said that in Hussaini, if they tell me that there's GLOF, the water is coming down, so I'll be happy that at least I'll be getting water, because water shortage is a key risk that the people are, and especially women, are facing. They have to go downstreams to get liters of waters on their back for at least drinking, for washing.
That is on Neelam's side, right? I think we lost her.
I think we did too.
Which is also a resilience issue. Should we, until she comes back, should we move on to FISA perhaps? And I'm happy to. Oh no, she's coming back.
GLOF 2 projects. The GLOF 2 projects, right? And then you in your recommendation, you mentioned that there are certain people who refer to the community-based early warning systems, and you somehow, if I get you right, you said that I don't know, would it be workable in mountain regions like Pakistan? So I wanted a bit of clarification that how possible it is to work on the community-based early warning systems in order to have a true resilience in hazards like GLOF. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Neelam. We lost you in between a little bit, but I think so. The question I got, and so to be very clear, I think so. CBFUSE is a fancy abbreviation, but in general, I think early warnings only work when they are community based, right? The question is just, what does that actually mean? There is no one community based early warning solution for all the communities, because also their experiences may be quite different. But there are different levels to this. If CBFUSE just means that the community is, knows how the solar panel is linked to the to the sensor. That's not yet community-based involvement, of course. And I know in Pakistan there are many communities where also under the GLOF2 project, there is a lot of engagement with communities, which is absolutely crucial. I think this is, I don't see so much of what the communities know about GLOFs then surfacing in the, in the assessments that are kind of coming out of Islamabad then, or coming out of New York or wherever, the shiny reports are made. And I'm involved in making some of those shiny reports. So I'm not, but so I think some of that, the transfer of not informing and then also holding accountable. So this is the problem, the most crucial part, right? An early warning system is only successful once it has proven its merit. And you can't say, okay, now there is a warning early warning system because the sensor is standing there. Often, then there is no flood for the next 10 years. And it only works if in the 11th year it's still working and then it actually does its job. And making sure that it does that is really, really hard. And one problem, and this alludes a bit to, I think, to the previous questions as well on multi-hazards, but then on what I said on GLOFs, that with the ice dam GLOFs, we'll see them reduce. If we, building infrastructure now on those target valleys that have been identified, right, and we instrument all those, and then in the next 10 years, there are no more floods in those valleys, but the floods appear somewhere else, which is something that we see happening in other countries too. We're kind of running after a problem that's running away from us because we cannot keep track of these thousands of lakes with early warning systems. That's not possible. So we have to aid and think already when we do something with the community there, that we don't just narrow it on a very specific problem that may actually never occur, but it could be that in future the risk in that valley is another mountain hazard. And this is why talking to the communities and asking them about all the potential, challenges they have are important. So we don't just install one sensors for GLOF and forget about everything else. But then also take the view out a bit from these different localities and anticipate that we ideally need to install those systems not for something that has happened in the past, but for something that will happen in the future. And so far, what has happened a lot is, looking at the events that have happened and then afterwards installing a sensor, which is understandable because this is the closest evidence we have. But in some locations, actually, this is probably the last GLOF that has ever happened. Or in what we see in Shishpur, for example, there won't be another GLOF for the next 20 years. We already know this because the glacier is now receding, because it's a surging glacier, a glaciological issue, but it's receding so much until it surges again. It's going to be 2045 probably. So in 2045, that GLOF may happen again. Because this is what we see since 1894 in this location, that it has happened like roughly in this cycle. So during those 20 years, a lot is going to happen. And so we should be prepared for all kinds of other things in between. And this is the big challenge that I see. Also on the community-based part, that we don't narrow in too much and then are stuck with one challenge that people then get frustrated as well. And we see this from in their famous examples in Switzerland and South America that I learned still during my studies, where engineers from fancy universities, in this case from ETH and engineering universities where I started in Zurich, they came and they said, we need to make this infrastructure, and it's very expensive. And then the community said, okay, we'll give 50% for the funding and we'll build it. And then afterwards, something completely different happened. And then they went back to the smart engineers from the city and said, well, why the hell are we listening to you? You cost us a lot of money, and then actually it wasn't useful at all. Next time we are not going to listen to you, and this is the worst thing that can potentially happen. That we lose the trust of the community with our advice, because if they don't listen a second time, it's very hard to get them back after you made a mistake once.
Okay.
And that's where it would be very helpful still from also the efforts that this GLOF2 is doing to learn a bit also from the pitfalls and the failures, and to keep and it's very hard to keep funding for this, right? Not funding for once the project is over, the funding is gone, but that we have funding for the next 10 years to check whether this actually worked. Because otherwise we're just starting another GLOF project somewhere else without actually checking the results. And this would go to the pillar that I didn't talk about. We need resources for this as well. It's very, very hard to get this. Sorry, it was a bit of a ramble, but
Thanks.
Can I interrupt for 1 second before we answer the other questions? So it seems that the link that I shared for downloading the materials is not working. That sometimes happens with like the changes in like the security situation. I'm not exactly sure, but I will have to talk with our IT department. So I will share a new download link in our LinkedIn page. So if you want to have access to that, I would suggest you join it. I have shared the link to the Pak-CRN page earlier. And yeah, I would hope in the next day or two. I can't be certain, but yeah, it should be coming up pretty quickly. They're quite efficient in their fixing of technology for us. So yeah, sorry about that, and I will hand it back over to Jakob.
Yeah. So in general, I'm very willing to share the slides as well. I'll leave it to Connor for now to do this in the official pathway. But in general, and you also don't hesitate to get in touch after this. I think at one point we'll have to close, but you'll find me. I have a couple of different email addresses that I respond to sooner or later. Fisa, I think was the next. Please go ahead. And nice to see you.
Hi, good to see you as well. It's always interesting how you bring different aspects, so-called multidisciplinarity, to the talks and your work. I was amazed by the fact that how you were able to put like different sort of narratives from people you met on your journeys in Gilgit-Baltistan. But what really like I don't know, but I want to say like I continue to wonder and ask myself that these sort of all kind of things we are witnessing are not happening in the vacuum. No, resilience, climate change go off. These are part of bigger global processes of which it is an outcome. So for example, climate change and so on. And then these are not just technical processes but also very political. So for example, recently, I don't know if you have followed or not, some farmers from Sindh in Pakistan has sued two German companies, and one continue to wonder, they're not in mountains, but they are feeling that this whole phenomenon is not something very much local, and we need to just work on our resiliences but rather we need to bring other actors into the picture and say who is responsible and so on and so forth. So I was asking myself, hey, where is that aspect of it? People are talking about political reparations and how to stop instead of just how to work within these worst situations and to cope up with it. So of course, people have been coping throughout their lives and I don't know, centuries. But where does those political aspects of this whole system falls into this bigger debate? And my second reaction also was like about this whole question of data. Of course, data is very important, and we are continuously, so I was asking, is it a question of unavailability of data that we are in a situation where we are today? I mean, as you said yourself, AI and whatnot, and we have plethora of data, and still we are in the situation where people, I don't know, each person or matramdan, when they die, we learn more from the local resources, not from global or international or the so all this amount of data we are accumulating for whom? Yeah. And for example, just a small example, you said in your presentation, here is the picture which I took because I didn't have a digital copy of the book. And then people started writing in the chat, I'm a local and I would like to have a book. So when we create these repositories of data, this is for whom? For global international corporations like Google or so, and to what extent it's accessible for the locals also. So I leave it here, but thank you very much and good to see you.
Thanks. I'm going to start with the second part, and I'm going to try to make it brief because, of course, this can go on very, very long. It's a very important aspect, and this is also so. If you check on the high risk project that I mentioned, we also mentioned this there that we do not only want to talk about fair data. So I'm going to type it in the chat, right? Just you asked about availability and accessibility. So when we talk about data, in our community, we often just talk about fair data, right? So this is this abbreviation for those of you who are not familiar. Now, this assumes that we just have to share and it's all going to be fine, but it forgets the aspect that Fisa just mentioned, for whom and who, then is also ownership of data, who has created it, is there safety when we share data? And this is why there is a new concept, which is called care data. And I invite you to, I can't go into so much detail here because this is a long story itself, but you can have a look at, so if you Google care data, Or if you check our website, so this highrisk.org, we also mention it there specifically for mountain data in the region. This is just to say that there is an awareness, and in our projects we do this, that yes, this part of the discussion needs to be had before we just say, okay, let's just let's just produce more data, or let's just put it all out there, or let's just say this is enough data and it's enough if we get all the data from Silicon Valley because they can map everything anyway. So that ethics debate around data is very, very important. It's hardly happening, to be fair, when we talk about data sets as well. You can do this on any case, right? You can do this on the population data that I shared that are not really revealing who is living in these locations, but they're revealing, of course, something that the government then could potentially use also with malintent, potentially, right? Or it could be that the AI model uses this to then produce assessments that were not approved by the people who shared data in the first place. And exactly, and then there's the question: what's actually useful to the people who are dealing with resilience and risk? And this is, I put this in a slide that I jumped over with, but I think the first question when we start to create new data set is that we have to ask, okay, like you said, who do we produce it for, and what data is actually useful for whom? And where do we invest in, and who do we work with on that? This is it's a discussion that unfortunately cannot be summarized in a CSV file or in a TIFF file, which is the usual data formats that we use when we deal with geospatial data. And I think that's also why there is a lot less space given to these discussions, because they require so many different stakeholders as well. So something that we're actually trying to do, and it's a very early stage, is really just debate for the region, is to have something like the Canadian Mountain Assessment. Again, I'm just going to give you the name, and for those of you who are interested, please have a look. So the Canadian Mountain Assessment is an assessment of changes in mountains in Canada that has been done very different from other environmental assessments globally in general. And from the bottom up, very, very elaborate, very long process of exchange, very difficult to do as well. But because it asked the questions that you asked from the very start. And it didn't just say, okay, let's gloss over them and let's come to a nice report and a nice map and a data set in the end. We are trying to learn from them how they did this, because I think having something like this, at least have the awareness that this is possible, having this awareness is possible also in this case in high mountain Asia, would be great. This has to be built from the bottom up, though. It's not something. This would be completely wrong if the United Nations says, okay, now we are doing from the bottom, from the top down. We are saying the bottom up has to do it this way. The way we have these kind of debates have to grow also from the bottom up, and this is what I try to visualize also on the disconnect between the different levels. I think the exchange between the community in Japursan and guys sitting in Islamabad and then guys sitting in New York or in Geneva isn't as fluid as it should be. And when it is fluid, the question on have we all agreed to the same goals hasn't been answered. But I think so. It's an absolutely crucial part, especially also in the AI world, right, where we are slowly losing the grip on who is actually taking charge here. I had a meeting yesterday with AI experts from Cambridge who basically said, well, all we should focus on is how to control the tiger rather than trying to compete with it, because it's gonna eat us up alive anyway. And as AI is taking so much space, I think having that debate is even more important, because we lose to even the capacity to keep the narrative on our side as human beings, even, let alone locals who are faced with it. So that was, so the other one, yes. So geopolitics, of course, this is it. If you look at multi-hazard risks in a vacuum without, I'm always using the partition example, which is the biggest geopolitical thing that I can use when I talk to people who are not from South Asia about South Asia, right? And if I ask people who work for years in South Asia on water resources, and if I ask them, do you know what partition is? And they say, no, never heard of it, but I know that the Second World War was very important. Then I go, okay, but then probably we also shouldn't be continuing to talk about water resources, because you cannot understand water resources even in Gojal, right? So even in the last hamlet of mountains in Pakistan or India or Nepal, partition had ramifications. And I'm not saying, I'm really just giving one example here. There are many aspects of geopolitics, current ones, the Strait of Hormuz just as much, that have ramifications. If we don't know about them, if we ignore them, or at least we should still be able to learn about them. If we don't know, we can still learn. But if we ignore them, then we're running into troubles, and probably should make statements on multi-hazard risk assessment, because then it would be very strange if I let coming from Austria, and there's a Pakistani colleague coming and saying, I'm going to do the risk assessment for the state of Austria now, and then I ask him whether they know what happened to Austria during the 1940s, and they say no, never heard about it. Don't know what the Second World War was, then probably without the awareness of the political situations here, it's also not appropriate. The same way goes the other direction, of course. I hope that answered it at least to some degree. These discussions, can go on for many workshops. And there was one more question for Sia. I don't know, Connor, you have to call it a quits at one point, right?
No, I would say maybe we can make this last question quick if you have
Perfect.
time. And yeah, people are welcome to leave if they have other places to go. But that's fine with me.
Yeah, so very grateful to all of those who stayed around. There's still a couple here. I always find very long webinars a bit tough, but I appreciate it. Thanks so much. So last question, perhaps then from Sia. Please go ahead. Sia, we cannot. You're still muted. If you're, at least, yes.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much for your fruitful and informative discussion about climate vulnerability. My question is, I am working as a climate resilience officer and agriculture food security officers in KRSP. My question is, based on your observation and research, can glacial melt be controlled or minimized through forest plantation and climate resilience practices in Chitral and Gilgit-Baltistan or in mountains areas? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the question, and thanks for that. It is actually sadly a very simple question, because the answer is no. This does not mean that reforestation and any of those practices are not useful. They are, absolutely, for many different reasons. But I think we have to get away from the narrative, and we also have to get away from that in other regions of the world, that we can do anything by structural means that is not related to reducing CO2 emissions to halt the change of glaciers. Glaciers they don't care what else we do apart from emitting more CO2. If we don't stop the current or significantly reduce CO2 output into the atmosphere, everything else is futile, unfortunately. Glaciers are a force, one of the many natural forces that do not adhere to our relatively small scale approaches. So this does not mean that those efforts that you mentioned are not useful. They are for many different reasons. And this would go into a lecture on hydrology of glacier-fed systems, because as glaciers are disappearing, the water is going somewhere else, right? It going underground, for example. It goes into the green water, what we call it, into plants. So then having those plants around, reforestation for stability. Also, stability decreases as glaciers are receding for different reasons. This is why we have an increase in debris flows and landslides in Pakistan. If you plant trees, this actually helps against it. This makes a lot of sense. So those measures can be very useful to offset the negative impacts that glacial recession has, but they cannot offset the demise of glaciers. Thanks. I think this was, I'm asked this question a lot as glaciologists, whether we can, and also people try to cover glaciers in the Alps with plastic. It's considered by most in the field as a ridiculous attempt to mask a much bigger problem. As Fissa was saying, we have to, if we see this in a bubble, just one glacier, it doesn't work. We have to acknowledge that the problems are coming from somewhere else. There's one more question from Pervez Ali. If it's very short, I think we can have it. Otherwise, I would close it afterwards.
Hi, yeah, I'll try to be very precise. I'm Parvez Ali. I'm a young policy advisor, so I have a question for you because I come from Gilgit-Baltistan region and currently I'm in Bonn, so I have a bit of a connection with UNU as well. My question was written yesterday when I saw this poster, and it's very simple, yet I need an answer for this, where your research and everything revolves around this. My question was the current GLOF and early warning systems in Gilgit-Baltistan are largely, they rely on remote sensing data with significant temporal gaps. And my question would be, what sub-seasonal resolutions are your climate resilience assessment models operating at? And how are you integrating community-based observational data from high altitude communities like mine, from Gilgit-Baltistan, Pasu, and all these communities? Yeah, for instance, some of the uh, terms like the Waqt, seasonal timing cues used by the Shina and other communities, to the ground realities of the glacier mass balance projection. That would be my question.
Thanks. Very important question. And so the resolution is a very technical one. At the moment, what we are trying to do, and you're absolutely right, that with remote sensing, we will never be completely appropriate what we can see from the ground. But what we are trying to do, rather than have some annual update, or glacial lake maps in Pakistan are updated more at the decadal scale at the moment, we are trying to do this every week. Because lakes are forming so rapidly, and we saw this sort of the event in Geyser we had. But then, if you remember, there was an event in so Geyser was last year. There was an event, a very small one in Kunjarab National Park in D. So that's if you go further from Khyber Sost and turn around the corner just before Kunjarab Pass, there is a small valley coming from a glacier there, and there was a GLOF happening from a lake that nobody had on any map because it appeared so quickly and then drained so quickly that it evaded most of our meshes. And so we are trying to have this update every week, that we are making a new map of lakes every week to be prepared for the relatively rapid rise in temperatures as well, to be able to then focus on the areas that are developing. But that's a very technical solution, and that alone is not solving all our problems. The second part of your question is getting to that more. How do we integrate local knowledge or the local insight from the ground? What we, for example, do, and the example again from the GLOF in, so there were two last year. One was in Riser that got a lot of attention, and the other one got very little attention because it was all the way up between Shandur and Mastuj, and it did not it did not destroy any infrastructure. But when I saw it happening, I immediately got in touch with the people on the other side in Chitral, and for Raushan with people in Yizer, asking them, okay, what would be useful for you in terms of information to put out that you don't already have, right? There is no point in me making an assessment on information that's already well known. So then we are having discussions still on how to further improve these reports. We try to, within 24 hours after something happening, to document it, also to make sure, okay, is this going to happen again next week, or is there still a rest danger? But then a big discussion that we have with the local contacts that we have in different places is, okay, what format is most useful for people to actually access the material? That's why we are translating. We have translated our reports in Burusheski, in Pashto, in whatever local language is most relevant for the community that's exposed. But this also, their technology is helping us. We can do this more rapidly. But then written text may not be the best solution. We are also discussing whether in future we should try to have more audible information to reach, to bring information back. And also to make sure that we have channels to very quickly get information from the ground, mainly on trying to assess what's actually still useful for additionally to the knowledge that's already there to give to people, right? Rather than just producing yet another report. So for this, I'm trying not just in Pakistan, but everywhere where these hazards work. We do have contacts. Sometimes this goes from the top down, like Akka, where I know the people working in Pakistan and also in Afghanistan. And when we see something happening, we try to reach out to them and see if we can help. And then we narrow down what is actually what can be done, and we are in touch by the usual channels of WhatsApp and Viber or whatever. But it's a constant dialogue that also on our website, that one way is to make very dry reports, but we're trying to get to have a dynamic discussion what's actually useful for people. And that's where we need the feedback from people like you as well. The project, for example, that we have on high risk is really a platform of different stakeholders in the whole region, from Bhutan all the way to Afghanistan and Central Asia. We count on the feedback of people who can also, you can even submit the request there and say, this is what we need, and we can then get in touch and try to assist. And this is an ongoing discussion. It's, like I said before in the answer to Neelam, I think if we try to have one solution now for gloves, one model for gloves, we probably in 5 years are overtaken by new realities. And we are seeing this, especially since 2025, where we had big gloves also coming from China to Nepal from a lake that we didn't even know before that it could form so fast. So it surprised us as well. Now we need to update our ways of mapping with satellite imagery. Things are happening so fast with accelerated climate change that, we also have to remain flexible in our approaches. And this is true for the technical aspect, but also in how we communicate with communities. Because you know this very well, 20 years ago, you communicated very differently in your community than you do now, right? And so these ways have also changed. And that's we're also trying to stay on top of, but it's not so easy. I would close it. I see another, yes, so the question for Murtaza is very easy. Yes, the probability of gloves is higher on newly formed lakes than old historical lakes generally. So that is absolutely right what you typed there already. You answered your question yourself. And I would close it at this point. No, otherwise we're falling asleep. What I would encourage you, if you do have questions, please reach out. I'm happy. I guess that Connor would be very happy to get feedback. He shared the link already, which now seems to work. If there are other resources that you need, I'm reachable by email, or those of you who are sitting in the same building, you can find me on the 23rd floor. And I'm also in Pakistan regularly. So if best would be to write an email. Whatever you type now in the chat may disappear. So please do send me an email. It will be shared on the slides as well. I think, Connor, I would call it quits here. It's 20 past, no?
Yeah, that sounds good. And yeah, same with me. If you have any questions or want to reach out, you can find me online if you just search my name. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Jakob, for hosting. And yeah, hopefully see everybody again in the near future. So, bye.
Thanks so much. Take care.